Hey there friends, welcome back to my channel. In today's video we're going to do something a little bit different than usual. I will be going over some background information on the up and coming series Loki, which of course will be premiering Wednesday, June 9th on one of our favorite platforms, of course. Since the episodes have not aired, I have not seen them. I just wanted to go over some basic information and some history on Loki to kind of, let everyone know how he came to be, what kind of happened, and just to give kind of more of a bit of a knowledge base on the character itself. Because I mean, we know some parts, but we don't know it all. So let's go ahead and get into some information. Hopefully, this will help you guys whenever you're watching the series and for future movies. So Loki is based on Norse myths and was reimagined by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby. So we all know that Loki and Thor are almost always found together in their movies or in their books. However, Loki first appeared in a comic book titled Venus, Volume 1, Number 6. That came out in August of 1945. The Venus series is a bit different from what we're used to with our comics, as this one specifically is more of a romance-led series, not so much of a super kind of fighting situation. However, by the time that series was completed, it had completely changed into a sci-fi slash horror series, which was kind of weird, but also kind of awesome. So issue number 6 was actually 19 pages long, and it was broken up into 3 different chapters. Chapter 1, Earth is in danger. Chapter 2, Face to Face with the King of Evil. And Chapter 3, The Wrath of a Goddess. The comic book is placed in a Mardi Gras setting. Venus, whom the comic book is named for, is actually placed against the Lord of Evil and the underworld, Loki. Throughout the comic, she's being tested by a character named Jupiter, and only until after she's proven herself worthy and passed all of her tests, where she is granted her powers back, which actually release her from her bond with Loki. So it's a bit of a different storyline. You don't really get the same mischievous kind of Loki, but you do get a sense that he's a bit, angry, that he's got some stuff going on, and it does give kind of like a brief representation of what he is now. But since 1945, he doesn't make another appearance until way later in a comic book called Journey into the Mystery, Volume 1, number 85, which actually came out in October of 1962. So under this series, we see more of a modern day version of Loki that we're used to seeing in the movies. The costume's a little more accurate to what we're used to seeing, and it's not too strange. The storyline follows a little bit more of what we're used to with a lot of the Loki situations. And in this one, Odin has actually trapped Loki in a tree until somebody for some reason, somebody, sheds a tear over him. While this is happening, Loki gets all up in his normal craziness, and he comes together with a plan, and he takes over the branches of that tree. And as Heimdall is actually walking past the tree, he lets one of the leaves go, and it hits him straight in the eye, which causes him to shed a tear. Now this actually releases him from his tree prison, releasing Loki up to do whatever he wants and breaking him free of this curse. So this sets the mood for him to kind of get started with his mischievous ways and to go ahead and start creating some havoc. Now, at this time, after he's broken up from his prison, he begins to kind of put together his plot to start messing with Thor, because of course that's his iconic, situation. It's him against his brother, all this stuff, or in this case his half brother. So he finds out that Thor is actually in New York, and he sets out to find him. However, he has some trouble finding him, so he's got to put together a plan. So for his plan, he decides to create some havoc in the city and causes a panic by making everybody see some of the worst things about themselves the negative sides to themselves and everyone else. So it just puts the entire city in a panic. And of course, Thor is going to notice this. It's not like he's just going to walk away and find out that, the city's crazy and he's not going to do anything about it. So he manages to go ahead and remove the negative images that Loki put up and calms the city down, which is great. And by doing this, everyone goes back to normal. And of course, in the normal fashion, he finds out that it was Loki that did it. They have to go through an entire fight scene. It's awesome. And after the battle between the two brothers, Thor does what he does in the current version, in which he, captures him and takes him back to Asgard for punishment. Which, of course, is exactly what happens in our current movies. Quite fun, but at the same time, we can tell that this is going to be a never-ending story between the two of them, and it's always going to happen. It is what is, and it's just what they do. So it's pretty awesome version for his first time coming up in the comic book since his previous time with the Venus series. So then, now that he's been put together in the series, we now, kind of go to the new version of what's going on. So now to the Loki series coming up, there's a growing debate on actually whether or not Loki's going to be either a good guy, is he going to be a bad guy, are we going to see a whole new side to him, what's going to happen? We really don't know that just yet. I mean, we have some brief information, but of course that's going to be a big kind of situation. But in most situations, we know that Loki is always going to kind of be the person that's going to start some trouble. And that's especially true when it comes to his adoptive family, which at the very beginning he didn't know they were his adoptive family, but then, he comes into the situation and this is where he's at now. So we have seen many sides to Loki. He is a very complicated character with a lot of emotional baggage, which is, just is normal for somebody who's gone through a whole bunch of situations. His actions are unpredictable, and it makes him an interesting character in the form of a friend or a foe throughout the series, because at some points he could be the good guy and he could be helping them out, and then other times he might just be the guy causing all the havoc in the city. So it really just depends on his mood, honestly, about whether or not he's going to be on their side or off their side. It's a whole bunch of just random variables that we never know. But in the end, of course, in our current series, it looks like Loki actually comes up to become a hero, because as we saw in the last few movies, he actually gives up his life to save his brother from, of course, Thanos. But before we get a little bit ahead of ourselves on that one, I would like to go over some background just that I've gathered. Kind of consider these little tidbits on Loki that can help you decide whether or not you're thinking whether he would be either a hero or a villain. Just a whole bunch of good information that can kind of put you in a place where you want to be whenever this series opens up. So, who is Loki and where did he come from? I know the series kind of gives a little bit of an idea, because the first movie, we get a view of, Loki coming into the Asgard situation. But they don't really mention too much because it's not part of the main storyline, because of course he's not the main character of those specific movies. But so Loki, Laufey's son, was named the god of mischief because he liked to use tricks and schemes to wreak havoc all across the realm of Asgard. He did this by using his insurmountable dexterity in magic and sorcery, which he had many abilities, and honestly there are a crazy amount. So he had the ability for astral projection, shape-shifting, hypnosis, molecular rearrangement, energy blasting, levitating, conjugation, cytokinesis, telekinesis, teleportation. Pretty much, if you can do it in the magic realm, he had the ability to do it. Now, we don't really see every power that he has in the current movie situation, but we do see that he does have a lot of abilities, and he does like to play with them freely. So, like we see in the current Marvel MCU movie situation, Loki is the adopted son of Odin and a half-brother to Thor. But who were his real parents? They don't really mention too much about it. You do see a small tidbit of it in the movie, but there's not a lot to actually go on to determine who he came from or where he came from. So after doing some digging, I discovered that Loki's true parents are none other than King Loki, who actually first appeared in a comic book titled Journey into the Mystery number 112, which came out in January of 1965. Now, he appears under the chapter called The Tales of Asgard, The Coming of Loki. So, Odin does kill him during this issue, and he does appear in later versions with Loki, which are for different situations, but a lot of the times it is just kind of flashback, because we do see that the way that Odin ended up with Loki was that he did kind of have to defeat Loki, or he did have to defeat Loki's father. So it's just a little bit of here he is, this is how he got here. Not too much information is explained throughout the rest of the series, but he does actually get killed off again in a secondary comic book called War of the Realms number 6, which came out in June of 2019. So as we can see here, even though he's not a main character, he does actually come back piece by piece, just to kind of round out the whole story of Loki. But of course, since he kind of has been dead for a long time, we're not going to see any crazy stories unless they decide to go on and do the background of the Frost Giants, and then maybe that they could do a whole possibility on that, but we never know what they're going to actually bring out. But let's see, his mother was named Farbuti, who actually appeared in a comic called Young Avengers Volume 2, number 10, which came out in September of 2013. So there's a lot of comic books that come from Loki's original appearance to now where they don't mention her at all. And in this case, it's not really a full-on mention about her. It's an introduction to his mom, but it's more so also a flashback scene, because in this case, she's not really there. For the appearance that she has here, it's actually just an impersonation, because there is a interdimensional parasite who is impersonating mothers during this episode, or this comic. So a little bit of update on her, but you don't really see too much. And when you do see her, it's just kind of a little bit of a flashback where they're trying to really just mess with Loki. So if you really think about it, I would consider that there's no real true introduction to her or background. But I mean, they do a little bit of it. They do also mention her death in a comic book called Mighty Thor Volume 2, number 700, which came out in October 2017. So they did wait quite a long time to actually put out any information that might be substantial about his mom. But then again, she really wasn't there to raise him, so it wasn't like her background or anything is going to be anything that's going to cause a lot of change in Loki's status or his way of doing things. So the reason that Loki was abandoned, though, was because he was born much smaller than the rest of his race. So we've seen some of the theatrical versions, and they are very large people, and Loki is a lot smaller than a lot of them. So his father, King Loki, left him on the side to die, and of course the war between Asgard and the Frost Giants comes about, and Odin, of course, defeats Loki and takes Loki as his own. So yeah, I mean, you do see that there's a little bit of there, but it's not a lot. And like, of course, you don't see too much details in the movies in the current timeline, because it's just not something that's too big of a deal. However, Loki, of course, eventually finds out that he's adopted. So growing up, he did suffer from feelings of unequal treatment from Odin, because of, rightfully so. I mean, Odin did favor Thor, and you do see that in the current theatrical versions as well. There is a great bond between the two that he was jealous of, and it just contributed to his feelings of hatred and anger towards his brother. So due to this resentment, Loki would actually pull a whole bunch of pranks on his brother, which in turn created even more rivalry between the two, and actually ended up affecting the queen because she loved both of her sons equally. In her mind, it wasn't really whether he was adopted or not. They were her sons, and just the rivalry between the two made it difficult for her to be the parent that she wanted to be. But they also don't mention much about her in the current MCU situation either. That we do get a introduction to her, a little bit of time with her in the series, but of course, like everything else in MCU, something happens. So with that, who is the Queen of Asgard? The mother of Thor and Loki, wife of Allfather Odin. Well, the Queen of Asgard is no other than Frigga. She is the one who has always attempted to keep the peace between the two. She wanted her boys to get along. Of course, every parent wants their kids to get along, whether it happens or not. That's not really something they can handle. But I mean, she did her best in that aspect. And when it was discovered that Loki was adopted, I mean, she did her best to handle the situation, which, I mean, it was hard on everybody. It was definitely hard on Loki because he was confused. He didn't really realize that he was adopted. When he discovered that he was actually the true king of Laufey, that created a lot more resentment and anger, and he became vengeful towards Odin and the entire family. Which does kind of make sense because if you think about it, Odin did kill his father. I mean, yeah, his original father did actually abandon him, but in reality, it's not really the part of it that he's going to focus on. Now, here are some pieces of information that I feel aren't very common, but I thought might be interesting for everybody to know. We all know that Frigga is Odin's wife, but I don't know if you guys knew that. If you did or not, please let me know in the comments. But Frigga is actually the goddess of marriage, and they follow that based on the Norse mythology roots. So they do keep very common with the actual form of Frigga in that aspect, which is kind of cool. I mean, I mean, we know she's a god, but they don't really say much about her, so it's just an interesting piece of information there. Now, we have known from the start that Loki was not her son. She knew that. She loved him. I mean, when you're adopted, of course, you know, she's going to know he's not. But it did catch him off guard, and it was difficult for him because he was actually a lot closer with his mom. But if we really look at it, I mean, if you follow the actual Norse format of this story, even the reason Frigga didn't really have an issue between Thor or Loki wasn't because one was adopted or one wasn't. It was actually because neither of them were her sons by birth. In the actual mythology of it, she became their mother after marrying Odin. So to her, both boys are literally the same, which is why she kept them so close to her and that she cared for them in the format that she did. And of course, we all know that she did everything she could for her sons. I mean, at the end of it, in the Dark World, which is the second version or the second movie to the Thor franchise, we do see that she is killed by Malachi, who is the leader of the Dark Elves. This happens because she's protecting Jane Foster, who is the love interest of Thor at that time. So we do see that she would do anything for her sons. And her death is quite tragic, but in MCU fashion, something's gonna happen to somebody close to one of the supers, honestly. So to move on from that bit of saddened material there, we go back to Loki and his jealousy. Of course, it was always high, but what we don't see is that in the comics, he actually tortures Thor quite a lot more than we know. As his jealousy grew, it actually began to get a lot worse once Thor was actually gifted with his hammer. Now, the fact that Thor was given this hammer, that he had to mess with Thor ahead of time, and the handle on that hammer is actually a lot smaller than it was supposed to be. So that's why he's using the little hammer. And if you can see that after Thor gets his new one in Infinity Wars, he favors the larger one, which in my opinion would have happened if the first hammer had actually been the right size. So it was actually meant to be a larger item, but Loki got his hands on it. And of course, he played his tricks, and well, we all know what happened there. Okay, so in all, stewing about Thor and the hammer and everything, it just, their situation just got more tense as time went on. So the idea of Loki and Thor constantly facing off is honestly something that it was meant to be. It was something that was going to happen. And it's just, it makes sense, honestly. But to try to make sure that this isn't so long-winded, I'm going to go ahead and get into a little bit about the current Loki series. So I have provided a little bit of information on Loki as a person, but when it comes to the series, it might be a whole different situation. So gathering my readings together about the series, so just some of the obvious facts right now. Loki, of course, is the god of mischief. And like in the previous movies, the character will be played by Tom Hiddleston, who did great with the first few movies of in the MCU. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing exactly how he plays him in this version. We know that in the previous movies, Loki was very untrustworthy and sometimes an outright villain in all the movies. So predicting how he was then and how he is now, I would say that it's going to be kind of the same similar situation. For this one, the person that will be writing this series is Michael Warden, who actually worked on Community and Rick and Morty. So just based on that alone, we can see that this show might have an actual comedic situation to it. So it might be more comedic based than some of the MCU material that we've seen in the past, which honestly I'm all for. Anything that's got a bit of humor into it, bring it on, because if it's hilarious, I'll love it, honestly. And we saw, of course, in the previous movie that Loki did end up passing away at the hands of Thanos in Avengers Infinity War. So it is a little bit confusing to consider that now he's getting his own show. But if we think about it and you look back to actually what happened at the end of that whole series, when they went through the whole time heist situation, we do see Loki kind of take off with the Tesseract during the time when Tony Stark decided to fake his heart attack to kind of get by all the guards, which at the time were said to have been S.H.I.E.L.D., but we all know were actually Hydra. So I'm assuming that based on that point of view of the time heist situation is where this is going to bring itself forth. And just based on the current trailers, found that it looks like the series is going to start off with Loki himself getting arrested by the Time Variance Authority, which is an organization that is tasked to protect the timeline. Now, Mobius, who will be played by Owen Wilson, reveals that Loki broke reality when he vanished during the time heist. So he's going to be tasked with working with them, and ultimately, well, what we can think right now would be restoring the timeline, which I would think would actually have some consequences for our favorite collective of heroes later down the line. However, I do see that based on the current trailers, Loki does break free from the Time Variance Authority, and he may actually wreak some havoc on the timeline on his own, which will be very interesting. We'll have a lot of different aspects to it, and of course, they're considering that this show might actually lead up to the next Thor, which will be your Love and Thunder, possibly also your Doctor Strange in the Multiverse Madness. So I see that this series might be the stepping stone to a lot of different aspects in the newer MCU collective movie situation, which honestly will be great because with the way that the MCU is handled, everything comes together in an almost perfect fashion. You have stuff from the past, the future, you got different universes, you got characters coming in and out. And honestly, I don't expect anything different from this series. And I do think that they're going to be putting in quite a lot of new information that will actually place Loki in a different setup than we've seen him before. But I don't want to get too far into it because, of course, I haven't seen the series. I know you haven't seen the series yet. I won't be able to tell you for sure until after I've seen it, and I'm looking forward to that. But my friends, that's all I have for now. If you like anything that you saw here today, or you feel that I've missed some things, please leave that information in the comment. I will definitely take a look at it. Please don't forget to like and subscribe this video and hit that little notification button on the screen. That way you guys can get some more updates on my future videos. Until then, thanks for joining me, and stay spicy, my friends.